Yeah, so
I can stand there.
yeah, I think that's good.
And if I sit, I'm okay too. Okay.
Okay, perfect.
So many people in the person like scribble and stuff. And I thought you did.
Yes, the reason I thought of Mary was because when I said I was coming to Canada to that you were here. Something you said some things.
Great, that's great. And then it's like, how is it really not?
How far away are you from Georgia?
It is not actually very far, but the public transportation is mind-bogglingly terrible.
Okay.
So it is actually, it's Waterloo. Yeah, it if you were lucky, you could drive it in an hour.
Okay. And if you,
But if you tried to take like, yeah, I left at 7:30 this morning, got here at 11:30. So that's a public transport. I mean, it was especially bad because I tried to get one of the 2 trains a day that there are. And they canceled all the trains because a train collided with a person, which I guess anyone would. Yeah.
Professor Saul.
Oh, yeah.
Ooh, okay. Did you get that one outside?
Just that.
Yeah, it makes British trains look amazing.
Sorry.
Hi, you made it over here. How are you coping with the snow?
Lovely.
She's from Valencia. I met her there.
He's also from Valencia.
Oh, hi.
Did you invite over?
Oh, no, that was, Rebecca.
I may have to.
Did you see the cross, right?
No.
It's
okay. Don't worry, it's fine.
The alarm will go off.
Yeah.
You
I'll
know.
just call attention to you. We can all glare at you in disapproval. Yeah, we were going to talk norm violations, so, you know.
Oh,
yeah.
Well,
I
excuse myself as a
Wow, I called with Amanda. Well, and she told me it was going clear. I'll send it to you. I have for dinner, I said that next Friday.
No, I haven't. I have been sat in my office with the headphones on, so.
Yeah.
Really just to remote.
Jennifer told me that all the most fun people are coming to dinner, so this way I can figure out who is and isn't
Isn't
fun.
coming for dinner, yeah.
Hi, Faye.
Hate it. How you found it?
No, I didn't. Where's the top?
Maybe I'll wait a couple minutes. Yeah.
Shall I just go and check on that?
Mm. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
I think, well, Kukla has a talk on, has a paper coming out on this topic and inquiry. He's probably refereed it.
No, I don't think I did.
We're teaching it in my class,
Oh, all right. Okay.
but I haven't read it yet. So.
Yeah, I don't think I've read it, yeah.
Isn't that old joke? Like,
What?
have you read the book? So what? Read? I haven't even taught yet.
Which one?
No, that's the joke.
Oh, right.
That's the other, yeah.
Oh, read it. I haven't even taught it yet. Right? Yeah, so. We're doing your book at the end of my seminar.
Oh, okay.
Oh, right, you know that because I invited you to present it.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
but we turned out to teach
That clock is
exactly
a
the
little
same
bit
time. Yeah.
fast. Oh yeah. I that. Maybe we'll start sheets probably.
She's coming anyway, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't mind.
Here we are. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Jennifer Saul. She's a professor at the University of Waterloo. She wrote a lot of philosophy of language, feminist philosophy, her most recent book. I had to write it down because I can never remember all the words in the title. But
I'm the same.
yeah. But actually, I wrote it in such a poor way that I'm gonna still screw up that I can't understand my handwriting. But is dog whistles and fig leaves how manipulative language spreads racism and falsehood? Is it close enough?
Yeah, that's what I
Yeah,
remember. Yeah.
I had to say something because of the young ones among you might not know, like other than her philosophical achievement, Jenny would run this blog that's sort of I found very formative for me in profession, the feminist philosophers, which is like this, all those excellent philosophers dealing often kind of amazing tales and kind of being very patient. And they had this kind of gender conference campaign, which has completely changed, I think, the face of philosophical conference. I remember, like in the beginning of my career, I go to all those conferences, which was 100% white male. If we can date the last one like this, was about 2006, and then
I think that's when the blog started.
And it's like, and it would just list the name of and the thing men talking about, and then the title of the and it was incredible. And I remember studying. It became so much that so many people are you get invitations that but you realize you're going to be in the blog. So Jenny didn't always just do great philosophy, but also contributed greatly to philosophical to our profession. So, thanks.
That also had the unintended consequence of me getting lots of extremely last-minute invitations, often on topics that I was a completely inappropriate speaker for. Like, wait, women in philosophy? Where? Let's find one. Oh, that blog, yeah. Anyway, thank you for inviting me. Okay, so I just want to note at the outset that, as is the case for so much of my work these days, it will be discussing various sorts of hateful speech and we'll be quoting from it. This talk starts from a question that has felt kind of pressing for me. So I've spent the last 10 years or so studying manipulative communication devices that politicians use when they want to get away with the racism or the sexism without being too obvious about it. Do we even need to think about that anymore, right? Is it still worth discussing strategic communication when it seems so unstrategic? Now, this may seem like a self-serving answer. My answer is yes. So there are several reasons for that. One is it is worth understanding how the US got to this point, and that did involve a lot of manipulative communication. One reason it's worth trying to understand that's quite salient for those of us who are located outside the US but nearby, is that we might like to help prevent this from happening. But also there are interesting new developments in use of strategic communication devices that are actually worth having a look at. So the first phase of my talk, and my talk's going to sort of proceed as a historical progression. Well, say progression. A historical sequence that's more of a regression. Okay. So I'm going to be focused here on the move to increasingly obvious racist language in politics over the last couple of decades. But before I start that, I want to ask the question, why should we care about that? Now, it's not should we care about racism. It's should we care about whether the racism is really obviously expressed or not? And I think that's a really legitimate question. There is absolutely nothing new about racism in politics. And there's a real question of why should it matter whether that is absolutely blatant or expressed in a more subtle way. My answer to the question of whether we should care is yes. And I realize this looks like yes because of Boris Johnson. And I'm okay with that. This is probably the time to tell you that I am actually a British and American citizen. I am now a Canadian permanent resident, but I'm making fun of my own leaders. So the reason we should care is because increasingly blatant racist language leads to increased racist violence. So to take one anecdotal example, this is why I've got Boris there. It was actually just before he became prime minister. He compared women in niqabs to letterboxes and bank robbers. And after he did that, in the following week, there was a massive increase in anti-Muslim incidents in the UK, 375% increase. Now you might be thinking, perhaps that's just that people reported it more because this was really salient and being talked about all the time. But 42% of the street-based incidents actually used his language of letterboxes and bank robbers, which weren't standard terms of abuse before he did that. So there seems to have been a causal connection there. More generally, scholars of genocide tell us about the role of increasingly blatant language in increased violence. So here is Lynn Terrell. The changing linguistic landscape of Rwanda in the early 1990s illustrates how linguistic practices eroded protective norms and thus opened the door to previously prohibited actions. In this and other 20th century genocides, the majority was made ready to kill their minority neighbors. First, by getting them talking among themselves, as if these neighbors were not really people at all, using derogatory terms for these others that spread fear and disgust. Then the derogatory terms were used openly and publicly, increasingly targeting individuals. As people got used to this new disregard, non-linguistic disregarding actions became more widely accepted. It is not a short route from derogating speech acts to murder, but it is crucial to understand the power of speech to the growth of both linguistic and broader social norms that make murder and mayhem come to be accepted. So that's why I think it's important to look at this. And now we're gonna go back to a time that we didn't know was a golden age. In fact, it wasn't. It might sort of seem like it. So here was a prediction.
Especially not if you're a Muslim.
There were many people it wasn't a golden age for. yeah. But here was a prediction from sort of mainstream of political psychology back then. One must wonder if the norm of political correctness and the fear of being accused of racialization have driven racial appeals even further underground, possibly to the point where virtually any presentation of race in audible or printed narrative or in pictures has become practically verboten. If so, the racialization of politics will increasingly take place mainly at the level of code words, or words that are fundamentally non-racial in nature that have, through the process of association, assumed a strong racial component. We may presuppose that modern battles will be far less obvious in nature and will rely instead on the subtle introduction of strategic words or phrases with racial connotations. So that was 2005. That was a bad prediction. So the conventional wisdom at this time was built around Tali Mendelberg's thinking in this field. So she argued that after the civil rights movement, it became widely, not universally, but widely frowned upon by white Americans to be overtly racist. Because of that, politicians couldn't be elected to national office if they were explicit in advocating for things like segregation, discrimination, or making claims of biological inferiority. And this is what she called the norm of racial equality. She sort of pointed and gestured at it, but didn't define it. So there's a restriction on being too obvious about the racism, if you want to make it a national political office in the US. She did not, what she was saying there wasn't that there's no more racism, right? It was that politicians couldn't get away with being too obvious about it. The crucial part of her view was that racism was still a very, very powerful force, but these norms which constrained the way that it could be expressed. And crucially for her, white Americans still displayed high levels of what psychologists call racial resentment. And racial resentment is not quite the same thing as implicit bias. It's measured in a different way. It's measured by, response to, on a Likert scale of how much do you agree with statements like these. So it's very sort of conscious response. So it's measured by the tendency to agree with claims like, it's really a matter of some people not trying hard enough. If blacks would only try harder, they could be just as well off as whites. And white Americans still exhibited quite high levels of racial resentment, meaning they were inclined to agree with that at quite high levels, despite the norm of racial equality being in place. Now, you might be thinking, that doesn't sound like any norm of racial equality, because that seems really super obviously racist. So the question is, how did these coexist? And the way that I can make sense of this is by understanding the norm of racial equality as something like an invocation, don't be racist, which is, at that time at least, was widely accepted, but not very action guiding, because each person got to decide for themselves what counts as racist. And they could have lots of excuses for why their own behavior or the behavior of their loved ones or their utterances didn't count as racist. So that could explain how you might, think that you're following this norm, don't be racist, while saying, oh yes, but the black people need to try harder, because you find a way of telling yourself that's not racist. So widely accepted, but not terribly action-guiding norm. Nonetheless, the fear of running afoul of this norm of racial equality did, for a while, constrain the very explicit expressions of racism. And that's the point where you get that quote, like the one from Horowitz and Peckley, about how this is going to go further and further underground. And it led to strategies of concealment, signaling strategies that would let politicians get the votes of the racially resentful voters while not being so obvious as to put off the other voters. Such as the well-known dog whistle. I like this illustration. It's a cute dog, but also it just gratuitously says, ships daily from US warehouse, which I just kind of love. Like I said, my country, I can make fun of it. Actually, you can all make fun of it too. Please do. So as I understand dog whistles, they fall into two broad types. And I'm going to talk about these only very briefly. They're not the main topic of my talk, but I just want to lay out the two types very briefly. So an overt code dog whistle is an utterance that has different meanings for different audiences. And the message is meant to be consciously understood by its target audience. So, for example, if I'm a Nazi, I might have an 88 tattoo that will be recognized by my fellow Nazis as meaning Heil Hitler, because H is the 8th letter of the alphabet. But other people might just think it's the year I was born, or it's an important date to me for some other reason. In China, it's a lucky number. There are lots of reasons you might have an 88, right? And my fellow Nazis will look at it and they'll consciously understand it and feel happy about that and know that I'm one of them and they can talk to me. A covert effect dog whistle is a very, very different kind of thing. So a covert effect dog whistle is meant to affect audiences in a way that they're not aware of, by causing them to bring their racial sentiments to bear on whatever they're considering without realizing it. So a good example of this in the US is the phrase government spending, which political psychologists have shown causes Americans to bring their racial attitudes to bear on what they're considering. So the more racist people will give different responses once you put that in, and the less racist people will also give different responses once you put that in. But very few people are aware that the phrase government spending does that. I think increasingly people are aware that the term welfare is racialized. I think everyone else is aware that inner city is. I think government spending people are still pretty unaware of. And I actually find this one especially interesting because it's really hard to have any kind of government without talking about what it's going to spend its money on, right? It's a kind of unavoidable phrase. And what happens to your discourse if there's an unavoidable phrase that's racialized in that way? So these are the two types that I think work very, very differently. But we saw a lot of both of them. Now I'm going to the second phase of my talk, which is, it's been very painful as work has developed, having to add on more and more phases. So Trump, part one, what happened? I'm not going to talk about all of what happened, obviously. I will say that back in 2015, I was just finishing up a term as head of department, and I had a year of research leave coming up. I wanted to study dog whistles and other kinds of very subtle racist manipulation, and I thought, oh good, there's a US election coming up and there will be lots of subtle racism going on. So yeah, there are many ways that research leaves can go wrong. So my plan was demolished by Trump's rise because dog whistles don't explain Trump's success at all. And I think this bears emphasizing because a really weird thing happened once Trump came to power, which is that everyone started talking about dog whistles.
Right. Yeah.
As though he was doing something subtle, as though dog whistles had anything to do with him. And I don't think they did. So during the campaign, Trump was saying things like this, to take just one example. Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States until our country's representatives can figure out what the hell is going on. There is no coded language for Muslims being used there. It's not some word that some people will think is about Muslims and other people will think it's, about, I don't know what. There's no subtle, unconscious manipulation. It's total and complete shutdown because something's going terribly wrong. Right? There's no dog whistles. And there are a bunch of utterances like that from the campaign where there's no dog whistles. It's right there on the surface. However, there's something else that's kind of interesting here, which is the addition of the phrase, until our country's representatives can figure out what the hell is going on. And that kind of phrase, a few examples like that, got me thinking about what I call fig leaves. And by the way, I do have an alternative photo with a naked Trump statue and a fig leaf on it. But I have, every time I give this talk, I start thinking, should I use it or not? And I decided not to use it, so you're welcome. Okay, so as I understand them, fig leaves are things which just barely cover something you're not supposed to show in public. So that's how they work in art, and that's also, I think, how they work in language. The basic idea is this. The speaker says something that would normally be seen as obviously racist, but in addition, and this is sort of a paradigm case of the fig leaf, there are going to be other variants of it. In addition, they also utter a fig leaf, thing slapped on top, which keeps the audience from correctly concluding that the utterance is an indicator of racism. The reason this can work is first that the norm of racial equality is, as I said, thin, kind of pathetic, not very action guiding, open to interpretation. Each person can determine for themselves what they think is required to follow the norm. And a lot of white Americans are guided by what the sociolinguist Jane Hill calls the white folk theory of racism. So according to this theory, there are many parts of it, but a few key tenets for our purposes. Only people can be racist, not language or institutions. So that's one way that makes it hard to be racist, but there's more. To be a racist, you have to have conscious beliefs in the biological inferiority of particular races, or you have to behave in intentionally racist ways. That's quite a high bar. And because it's such a high bar, racists are rare and monstrous figures, pretty easily recognized. They tend to wear white hoods and that kind of thing. But they're even rarer than you might think, because people often mistakenly say things that sound racist, even though they're not really racist in their hearts. So she talks about and gives lots of examples of what she calls the head-heart dichotomy, where you say somebody's head is leading them astray and making them say these racist things, but they're not racist in their heart. And I was sort of puzzling over the idea that that was widely held when, during the Trump first term, Kellyanne Conway declared that the media should cover what's in Trump's heart rather than what he actually says. Which, if you think about it, is an incredible instruction to give to journalists. Don't cover what the president says. Right? So there really does seem to be a commitment to this idea. And once you start looking for it, you see it everywhere. All of this also makes it really possible to find lots of fig leaves that can help to cover for what would otherwise be recognized as racism. So we'll start with the simplest, which are so simple that they're very widely parodied, but they still work with some groups in some contexts. I'm not racist, but, which is a phrase that for probably everyone in this room makes you sort of tense up and say, oh God, what are they going to say now, right? Some of my best friends are Black, but same thing, right? These are synchronic fig leaves, which are uttered along with the utterance that would otherwise be seen as clearly racist. These particular ones are unlikely to work for people who are really familiar with them. There's, whole blogs devoted to mocking them. But they will work on some people. There's also more sophisticated ones, and this is probably the only time that you'll see sophisticated and Trump on the same slide. But let's go back to the one I started with. Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States until our country's representatives can figure out what the hell is going on. So this part at the end that I put in yellow is a fig leaf, because it's added on to cast some doubt on whether this is a clear indicator of racism or not. And the reason it works for the people it works on, which we'll get to, is because of the white folk theory of racism. According to that theory, if you're an anti-Muslim racist, you condemn all the Muslims totally and forever, right? It's not going to be temporary. If it's a temporary objection, it can't really be racism because it's just about some weird thing that's happening now. So that shows he's not racist. Diachronic fig leaves occur after, or well, sometimes they could occur before, but not at the same time as the utterance that would otherwise be taken to indicate racism. So with Trump, you get a lot of these. These are Trump quotes. After being criticized for obvious racism, I am the least racist person. I have so many Black friends that if I were a racist, they wouldn't be friends and they would know better than anybody and fast. Very convincing. Moving away from the paradigm case, you can also have third-party fig leaves. So I'm trying to be equal opportunity here. This is a Democratic politician. I admit I've partially chosen it because I just love the photo of his wife. So this was Ralph Northam, the Democratic governor of Virginia, who had a blackface scandal around the same time as Justin Trudeau's. He is the last person on earth that would be racist. One of Mr. Northam's white childhood friends, Harry Meese, told me, we have just as many Black friends together as we do white friends. So some of his best friends are Black. It's the same thing, but told by a third party. I do love the photo. Now, it's really important to the workings of fig leaves that they work against the background of a divided audience. They do not work on everyone. The explicit racist, the people who are just happy to think of themselves as racist, and there are unfortunately more and more of these people, they don't need them. They, don't mind them being there, but they don't need them. They would be just as happy with the racist utterance without the fig leaf, in fact, happier. Many people won't accept them. I'm guessing the people in this room wouldn't accept them. That you say, yeah, that doesn't fix it, right? The people they work on are the persuadable people in between these groups. These are people who worry about violating the norm of racial equality, whether it's because they themselves don't want to be racist or because they don't want to have other people think of them as racist. They worry about that norm. But they will accept a lot of excuses to convince themselves that the norm isn't being violated. So they can be led to dismiss the concerns about racism, even though they don't want to go along with the racism. And I think these people, if they exist, are especially important to think about, because the first group is not going to be very movable, and the second group doesn't need to be moved. It's these people who we really need to shift. But are there any such people? So we've got some interesting data from 2016 on the question of whether Trump supporters cared about racism then. So this was just before the election. 87% of Trump supporters said that they believed him not to be racist. That is obviously not an indication either of what they believed or of whether Trump was racist, just so we're clear on that. But what it is an indicator of is that they didn't want to say both that they supported him and that they were racist, right? If they were lying and aware that he was racist, then they still felt the need to lie. So they were feeling some pressure from that norm of racial equality. They had not, in fact, completely cast off that norm. Did the fig leaves actually do anything? So the supporters did cite the fig leaves. I realize I didn't quote in this talk yet from his utterance about Mexicans. He, in his announcement of his candidacy, I won't try to reproduce the exact words, but talks about Mexicans being rapists and then says, but some of them I'm sure are good people, with that being the fig leaf. And so I found, in 2016, I found a discussion online in which Trump supporters were discussing whether or not he was racist and reassuring each other that he wasn't racist, which was kind of interesting that that existed. So they said things like this. I think Trump is attacking them based on their actions, not their ethnicity. He's attacking the illegal immigrant group, not the race group they belong to. I didn't hear him say anything racist against any race. What I did hear him say is illegal Mexicans bring drugs, crime, and are rapists, but I'm sure some are good people. Seriously, what's racist about that? Trump's not racist. He's not against all Mexicans, just the illegals. So the fig leaves do seem to be doing something. And I think it's worth looking at fig leaves because I think they're especially dangerous. The reason they're especially dangerous is because they have the ability to change what gets counted as racism in a way that dog whistles do not. So if somebody says or something that's pretty obviously racist with a fig leaf, and you accept the fig leaf and say, oh, maybe I don't need to worry about this being racist, then R now seems to you like the kind of thing a non-racist would say. So people who accept Trump's fig leaf about Muslims come to accept that you could be a non-racist and call for a ban on Muslims, which they wouldn't have accepted before that fig leaf. But once they've seen that and decided, well, he's not racist, he's doing it just for now, I guess you can have a Muslim ban and not be racist. That's a shift. Dog whistles can't do that because dog whistles are either communicating or priming racist content in a way that much of the audience won't notice it. The overt code dog whistles, only the people who are already part of your racist group will know about it. The covert effect dog whistles are affecting people outside their awareness. So they're not going to take explicit racism and change your view of it because you're not seeing it. Fig leaves are different. To have a fig leaf, you've got to have something that would normally be recognized as obviously racist, and then something else, either at the same time or a different time, that raises some doubt about whether that first thing actually is so racist. And so that thing is changing how you see the obviously racist bit. Because of that, fig leaves are uniquely dangerous. They can shift how obviously racist speech is viewed. Dog whistles can't do that because there's no obviously racist speech involved. Now, I'm focused here on racism, but dog whistles and fig leaves are not just for racism. They can help you get away with violating all kinds of norms. Norms against fascism, against advocating political violence, against wild conspiracy theories, violent misogyny, transphobia, right? So these are all purpose ways to cover for the norm violations. Now, the prediction from repeatedly using the fig leaves to take the obviously racist speech and cast some doubt on whether it's racist is that eventually they're not going to be needed. What used to be shocking and norm violating isn't anymore because norms have changed. Which unfortunately brings us to today with the crucial question being, is that happening now? What's going on now? So 2024 election was a very bad thing, obviously. Just one quote about it here. This time there is no excuse. America knew that he was a convicted criminal, serial liar, and racist demagogue who 4 years ago attempted to overthrow the government. It voted for him anyway. Now, of course, there was anti-incumbent mood everywhere. There was inflation, but things that would have been disqualifying in the past were not. Things like very obvious racism and extremism. So the question is, are we now beyond fig leaves? There's a case you can make that seems like we are completely beyond fig leaves. Trump, right after the election, in fact, talking about his beautiful white skin, an utterance I think hasn't actually gotten so much coverage, which is kind of weird because he goes out of his way to make his skin not really white, which just shows what he really means by the term white there, right? Frequent claims that immigrants are poisoning the blood of America, calling political enemies vermin and garbage, posting a video of the Obamas as apes, general absence of fig leaves, the actions of ICE, blocking of refugees except for white South Africans. On the other hand, we do sometimes get fig leaves. So after Elon Musk's Nazi salute, there were lots of explanations of why he was just moving his arms that way for some other reason, and claims that was just a joke, which is a classic fig leaf. After sharing the video of the Obamas as apes, we get the claim that was posted by mistake, so it's not indicating racism. We also get him saying, he was asked, do you condemn the racist part of the video? And he said, of course I do. So say, of course I don't believe that, right? So you do sometimes still get fig leaves. There's also something else going on that I think is really interesting that I hadn't noticed before, but undoubtedly was also happening before, which is in the absence of fig leaves by the speaker, the audiences are starting to supply their own fig leaves. But this is a really interesting discussion I saw that was by, it was a tweet from a reporter the day after the election. And he actually went and spoke to a bunch of people undocumented people in the US. And he writes, several of the migrants I've been speaking with say they would have voted for Trump themselves. Most are folks who crossed the border illegally in the last 2 to 3 years. They don't believe Trump will deport them because they are here to work and are not criminals. So, although Trump talked a lot about deporting all of the people who are here illegally, they somehow added on to that, but only the ones who aren't here to work, or only the bad ones, or only the criminal ones, and added that on to their understanding of what he was saying. So they feel comfortable saying they love Trump and wanted to vote for him. They seem to be supplying their own fig leaves. Another case of people supplying their own fig leaves, this comes from a New York Times article that was just before the election about why are so many business people still supporting Trump, despite all this talk about tariffs. And so these are just a couple of the things that these business people said. Asked if he believed Mr. Trump would purge the federal government and fill its ranks with election deniers, Mr. Ficini sipped his iced tea and thought for a moment. I don't, he said. So why was Mr. Trump saying that he wanted to do that? It could be just for publicity, Mr. Ficini said with a shrug, just riling up the news. Another one. Mr. Rodriguez did not think that Mr. Trump would take the United States out of NATO. It'll never happen. Nor did he worry about Mr. Trump's fantasy of one violent day of policing. Yeah, that's just a soundbite, he said. He's not going to do that. So they seem to be supplying kind of third-party fig leaf of he's just joking. He doesn't mean it. He's just negotiating, right? He's not actually expressing these views. So here's where we are now. I think the actions of the US government are very, very clear. There are federal restrictions on even discussing gender and race, or interest in anything using words that are kind of related to gender and race, like bias, which makes it really hard for statisticians. Snatching people off the streets in broad daylight, murder in broad daylight. So, and I think this is right, it's maybe not so important to understand, to analyze the language in order to understand what's going on. We don't need to look to the language to try to figure out, is there something racist about this administration? It's like, of course there is. We can see it in their actions. The language, analyzing the language is not for the purpose of understanding that. But it's worth understanding how we got to this point, and in part that's to prevent it from happening elsewhere. But also in the US, understanding the language can perhaps help us in thinking about how we get out of this and what to do if we get beyond this to keep it from happening again. And the language, we start seeing the importance of language when we think about the Trump voters. So I think most of the discussion of Trump voters that we see is focused on the first group I mentioned here, which is the enthusiastic racists and misogynists who just love him. And people are horrified by that group and shocked by it, and they want to understand it. I think the other two groups are, in a way, much more interesting and worth the effort to understand, which are people who are deeply underinformed. As he said, he loves the low information voters. And people who didn't actually like all of his words and actions, but they found a way to convince themselves it would be okay anyway. For example, by supplying their own fig leaves. I think groups 2 and 3, who I think are much, much less discussed, are the most important people to look at for the purpose of figuring out how to shift things, because those people are reachable in a way that group 1 probably isn't. And careful thought about language may be especially important for group 3, the people who were finding ways of explaining away him saying things that sounded bad. So one thing we know, although I do want to do more study of this, it's something I'm just beginning to look at, is that people were supplying their own fig leaves to explain away how the utterances weren't really racist or not really violent or not really directed against them or their loved ones. I mean, in some of these cases, it's not just about what he's saying about other people, but these undocumented people who said that they liked him and would have voted for him. Right? That's something really interesting to try and understand. And I think that shows a need to think hard about how the speech is received, which would be very different from what was said. That you can have violent racist rhetoric and an audience that somehow convinces themselves it's not as bad as it seems. And that's a phenomenon really worth understanding. So this is, I'm going to just gesture here to a project that I'm only just beginning that I find really interesting. I'm tentatively calling it the pragmatics of wishful thinking. So I want to understand the way that people hear the utterance and then they add on a fig leaf which makes them feel better about it. And my current thought is that maybe something like conversational implicature, but with a variation. So in conversational implicature, one way of understanding it is that the audience, the conversational implicature that the audience understands is what they need to assume in order to understand the speaker as cooperative, conversationally cooperative. But with this kind of thing, it's what the audience needs to assume in order to understand the speaker as acceptable to contemplate, right? Okay to vote for, not so terrifying. And that things are getting added on that way that aren't just about understanding the speaker as conversationally cooperative, but about understanding them as acceptable. And I think this may be quite an important mechanism to look at that I haven't seen explored yet. So back to what's going on in the US. As I said, the actions are clear, and those people who felt discomfort but voted for him anyway, the people I'm especially interested in, they've got two choices. They can find a new way to explain things away, or they can turn against him. I'm pleased to say that two is happening more than I had expected it to. And in fact, if we look at what Trump voters think about immigration, it really does look like what he's doing on immigration is for a significant chunk of his supporters, obviously, not all of them, not what they expected or wanted. That somehow they had found a way of understanding him where it wasn't going to be this. So one indication of it is just these graphs that you'll see everywhere of what Americans now think about Trump's handling of immigration. So back at the start of 2025, when he just took office, 46% of Americans approved of his handling of immigration and 39% disapproved. Now these have not just flipped, but disapproval is up to 53%. So this is a huge shift that's taken place. And if you see it broken down by people who voted for Trump, a lot of them have switched as well. There are particularly significant shifts in the Latino community. Yeah, you notice when that happens. And so, some of these people who were saying he's not going to come after me and my family, he did, right? So if it's still worth looking at the strategic communication devices, let's think about how and in what ways. So I've just been arguing that fig leaves are important to understand, but maybe with more of a focus on the way that they can be supplied by audiences. Now I want to turn to dog whistles. I will be looking at some dog whistles from the other side, that is the anti-Trump people. But first, I'm kind of interested by the extent to which they're still in use, even though there isn't the same need to use them. So there are a lot of these sorts of things being put out by ICE. It's a recruitment thing. It's joinice.gov. And it says, "We'll have our home again." That's a white nationalist song that's been extremely popular amongst online white nationalists in recent years. It's not widely known by other people. So it can function as a kind of dog whistle. This is just like a cowboy and a peon to home, and what's so bad about that, right? But the white nationalists know what it is. So what's going on with this dog whistle? If they're in power now, why are they dog whistling? Okay, so one thing is it's a recruitment message for ICE. It's targeting the recruitment at a specific group that will get very excited about this specifically and say, we are wanted. This particular dog whistle, I haven't been able to find an image of this, but I read an article saying that the Proud Boys posted message received and a picture of a dog whistle next to this particular one. Right, so that it could not be clear that it was working in that way. But interestingly, in the case of this dog whistle, it's not clear that there's much desire to hide it. Right? That is, these might be what Kelly Wyrick calls brazen dog whistles, which are designed to be seen and argued over. And there are a bunch of reasons why you might want that to happen. So these are a version of overt code dog whistles. One is that it's fun for the people in on the game. They love spotting and saying, oh, they're messaging to us. Another is it can set the opponents against each other, so that some people are saying that's a dog whistle and other people are saying, oh, it's just a cowboy with a horse. What are you getting so upset about? We should focus on other things. And then you get a big argument about it. And that argument can serve as a kind of distraction from what's actually happening. In fact, just when these started being posted, I was contacted by a reporter who wanted to talk to me about these dog whistles. And I didn't give him the answer he wanted because I just kept saying, look, he was asking these questions, but do you think these indicate some racism? Like, we don't need to look at the dog whistles for the racism. I mean, I'm into looking at dog whistles. I find them very interesting. I think it's important to look at them sometimes, but you can just look at what's happening in the streets to see the racism. You don't need the dog whistles to tell you that. So I didn't make it into the article. I was also thinking it's just a distraction to get people talking about the dog whistles. I think I was probably wrong to reject it so strongly because I think there's something important about the fact that they're doing these dog whistles from this account. Which is, it's a display of power, right? It's a display to these white supremacist groups that have been underground for a long time and dog whistling and using codes because they were socially unacceptable, that now we, white supremacists, are running the White House and we're running the Department of Homeland Security and we're speaking that special coded language from the Department of Homeland Security's X account, right? So I think it's a display of power by using those dog whistles. It's shown that the norm-defying rebels are now in control. And now for something completely different. That's why I should have put on the slide. Okay. So this was another dog whistle that happened at the start of Trump's second term. Did any of you know the cute winter boots phenomenon? It was a brief thing on TikTok where people started using the phrase cute winter boots. This was like February of 2025. As a label on their videos if they're going to discuss where ICE was having raids, right? Because cute winter boots is a fashion thing that TikTok's going to promote in February, and your videos about cute winter boots are going to do well in the algorithm, but your videos about fighting ICE aren't going to do well in the algorithm. So people would post these videos called cute winter boots, and I think in some of the cases they would be talking about cute winter boots and holding up signs telling you where the ICE raids were happening. This didn't last very long because these things don't. Once it gets found out, then everyone knows what it is and it doesn't help you anymore. Does anyone know what that is? It says 8647 and it's made of stones on sand.
Yes.
Yeah.
86. Trump.
Yeah, 86 means take out, take it away, and 47 is Trump, and 47 is president. This particular instance of 8647 was the one that James Coney posted to Instagram, which got him investigated for threatening the life of the president. Okay, so that's a code for take out Trump. And you know what FTT is? Fuck Donald Trump, I'll say it. Hello, people on YouTube. And then this one, it's a bunch of flowers, and in this sort of flowery font, we get foxglove, daisy, tulip. Which, again, coincidentally stands for FDT, right? So these are ways that you could transmit your anti-Trump messages without saying it too explicitly.
I'm sorry, what does FTT mean? I mean, how
Oh, no, we're gonna have to say it again.
F Donald Trump.
Fuck Donald
Fuck
Trump.
Donald Trump.
Oh, fucking right.
Yeah. Yeah, if I said F, you wouldn't understand it because you're British. Fuck. So here's another thing that's been happening. This is a partial list of forbidden words that you can't put in your grant applications that will get your grant applications rejected or withdrawn. It's a very partial list. They really were doing it in this crude search for the word way. So because inclusion was on the list, as they were censoring government documents, there was a tax inspector's manual that said, be sure to check for inclusion of the social security number, and that was deleted because it was a discussion of inclusion. Right? But we have lists of banned words in the US now. They're not completely banned, but they're banned for many purposes. Once you get lists of banned words, you get people trying to find ways around that, ways to communicate anyway, even though the words they want to use are banned. What that leads to is the development of dog whistles. It leads to the development of codes, right? So that you can speak to your fellow activists and not be understood by the government that's trying to censor you. A really eloquent discussion of this comes from the Chinese activist Yu Hua, writing in the New York Times many years ago. Does anyone know what May 35th is? It is a way of rendering the date of Tiananmen Square. Right, the actual date, June 4th, is not, you're not allowed to say. So they say May 35th. And he's writing about how activists have developed their whole new ways of communicating with each other. And that it has turned out to be, in his view, a kind of freedom. May 35th freedom is an art form. To evade censorship when expressing their opinions on the internet, Chinese people give full rein to the rhetorical functions of language, elevating to a sublime level both innuendo and metaphor, parody and hyperbole, conveying sarcasm and scorn through veiled jibes and wily indirection. Surely our language has never been as rich and vital as it is today. Sometimes I can't help but wonder if one day the June 4th kind of freedom were to arrive, would we still be so creative, so ingenious? So the positive spin is that the US is moving into a period of enormous creativity. But at the very least, dog whistles have a new kind of relevance. So where we are is that norm violations are far more open, but the audience is supplying fig leaves to avoid having to face up to that, to at least some extent. The dog whistles are, however, still being used by racists, partly to signal to each other, but partly as a display of power, that our secret language is now in the highest places. And dog whistles are increasingly being used by people fighting back against that. So more generally, it is still worth discussing strategic language despite the open norm violations. There's a lot that we still need to understand. And thank you. I tried to have a happy ending.
Okay, so we're gonna have a 4-minute break and then come back. If there might still be cookies and coffee, you know.
Excellent.
Oh, I thought they were for before the talk.
When is dinner? Oh.
Sorry?
How could I not get it?
How you could not?
How could I not get that?
Oh, that, yeah. It could happen to anyone. It could happen to anyone.
I have to class now, but Katrina's here.
Okay,
The reservation's under Ellen.
Ellen, okay. It's 6, it's right after. Do you guys know each other?
No,
No.
I'm Jason Senna.
Hi, Jason.
Who are you?
That's it. Yes, sorry, yes.
Yeah, for the visiting faculty here.
In the
At the
second
center,
round.
yeah.
Exactly.
You guys can do visiting faculty.
Well, they don't get paid much. That's the significant. Yeah,
Right, no, it's so cool, it's so.
it's but you get it's a nice office, right? Yeah.
Nice host.
Elizabeth, you know Elizabeth Ayers.
Yeah,
She's also visiting faculty
I
here,
see.
and Luara was there. So they get Luara.
Wow.
Elizabeth is in North Carolina, so she didn't come. And a couple of there's another one, Jean Song. I don't know if you know her.
You're joining us actually, so you.
Yeah. Questions here. Cool. We should talk about active fellows and stuff.
Yeah, you guys don't have faculty?
What? No, I haven't had my own sector.
Oh, I see.
July 1st. Democracy and it's called the Democracy Academy.
Oh,
But I've done a ton of stuff for fellows, and I have to, like, your programming is kind of what is very, like, I will, Alberto Toscano is someone we're a number of your talks, and Jenny's all definitely for talks, so we should figure out how
to kind of do together. Yeah. You guys are so much richer than we are, and true. So that
Yeah.
maybe we can. Yeah.
We're as far as I can see, everything in Canada works by, like hitting people up for money.
Yeah.
But it's not that Yale work that way. But also you get to do things via centers.
Right. Yeah.
So this is my first time.
So yeah. So you might,
It's mine.
William had you know William, don't you?
William. Hello, I'm Jason. William has come to many of our events. He's a regular.
Didn't know.
Yeah,
Tommy
but-
Curry is giving a talk here.
I know.
I
What
got-
is that?
March 25th.
Oh shit! I'm going to New York City. Nicole Hannah-Jones is doing my book launch.
Oh, well, I mean, that's good reason.
It's sort of the opposite of Tom.
Yes.
So tell Tony, I'll have enough opportunity to tell you this, but it sucks that I'm missing Tony. But
Yeah,
it's
that's
great
okay.
that I'm
I'll give him your.
Yeah. I'm sure we will hang out. That is a genius.
Yeah, I mean,
Because it's gonna be really interesting. It's gonna be really interesting. talk.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Yes.
I have to write Lionel McPherson's book. Have you read Lionel McPherson's book?
Which one is this?
And that's why I take
It's his one book that just came out, and it's about,
look for tonight, maybe
to review it, it's about like basis for racism, not being biological, but social. That was super fun. I emailed you in 2018 to the 2019 about the blatant dog whistles, and I was like, I think they play more of a role. And then we both puzzled about it, and we both thought they're not dog whistles.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Well,
It's a
right, that's
struggle.
what-
But they, if they're not
Well-
dog whistles, then they sort of move in and out of being dog whistles. So I think they have to be, but I think they are kind of,
It's interesting that
they're working differently.
you used to think they weren't dog whistles, and
Yeah. Oh, no, my thoughts have changed a lot of
Uh-huh.
things, but
well,
I
we were
guess I
figuring
still
this out in
think they're,
real time.
so I still think they're dog whistles. I don't, to be honest, I don't think my definition works for them.
That was my
And
point.
that's something that
Yeah.
I struggle with, so
Yeah,
I,
exactly. Good.
yeah.
That was the
I'm
person who
still struggling with what
the
I do.
person who pointed this out when I taught your paper in language and power was Jack Paul. You know him? Like, he's a big influence on like Liz Anderson and Sally Hassan on social media.
Right.
So he there's a bunch of his stuff that I taught language and power with him twice. He has this book, Cultural Software, that influences Sally
Mhm.
and Liz, which is about like a cultural software theory of ideology. 1998. He's at Yale. Also. That was fun teaching a paper with him. But he was like,
Yeah.
raise that case.
Yeah, and I mean, right from the start, I've always discussed some of the examples where people find out that it's a dog whistle and discuss it. It's
Right. I remember when your first discussion, we used the George Bush one. Remember the religious one?
oh, I no longer think that one.
Right,
is a dog
exactly.
whistle. Oh,
Jack
no,
Dawkins says that.
so I actually think that one is sometimes a dog whistle and sometimes not. I think usually it is not, but I think when his speechwriters inserted it to send a message to a particular group of people, it
Well, that was
became a
your,
dog
right.
Yeah.
What's the example? What
So
did you
it's
say?
that he had a tendency to talk about the wonder-working power of God.
Sergio, 4 minutes is up.
That's a phrase
There's a
that
cute
just sounds
Wow.
like, you know,
There's a cute
political
about
crap. But is widely used in particular evangelical communities
Right,
as a
okay,
way of indicating that he was one of them.
Yep.
And I think, you know, insofar as he's doing it just because that's how people of that group speak, I think it's not a dog whistle, but when it's inserted specifically to communicate with those people while going unnoticed by others, it is dog whistle.
That's an amazing photograph, the cowboy in the military.
And they're interesting images on those. I mean,
Brilliant.
they put work into their graphic design.
Yeah.
I think it's, and actually there's a huge lineup to the bathrooms here, like, which are, we're not very well stocked. It's just one more
They
minute.
really are.
Yeah.
Is it everyone?
No, yeah, there is sort of people are still
I see.
in the line.
Oh, we're responsible.
Yeah. Mm.
Blame it on the coffee.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
William, yesterday's talk seemed really interesting.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe we should start. Okay, yeah, Jason, and I should say I'm gonna screw up people's names. So
Okay. The super interesting. So here, here you categorized Trump voters into 3 groups, and said the most interesting one are the persuadables who supply the dog whistles themselves. And I think you're missing a very important group. And when thinking about political strategies, this group, I think, is more important than the group or equally important. I don't argue with that, but your group's important too. Historically, fascism wins when conservatives vote for the fascists over the non-fascist party. Because they think that, okay, they're anti-Semitic, in the case of the Nazis, they're fascists, they're racists, but they're better than the pro-choice people, or better than the pro-LGBTQ people, or better than just that guy who we don't like. And so racism isn't a deal breaker over democracy. So I think living in the United States, I know people who are like, sure, I know people, in academia, like the white guy posse who is like, for him, because he was anti-woke, even though like, oh yeah, he's gonna just, and then thought it was, some of them thought it was exaggerated, his danger. It's true, some of that group. But I think there was a lot of group, you get
Some of those people are actually in group 1.
so you think if racism is
but-
a deal breaker?
No, I said some of them are.
Right.
So I think a lot of those people are actually in group 3. And I think, so it may be that they don't worry about explaining away the racism, that they don't think it's a deal breaker, but there's other stuff that would be a deal breaker and needs explaining away. So the fact that he seems to have absolutely no respect for the Constitution needs to be explained away for them. The fact that he's behaving like a fascist who wants to destroy the institutions needs to be explained
There
to
will always
them.
be one.
Yeah,
That would
yeah,
need to be-
yeah.
oh, that's
The fact that
interesting.
he, you know,
That's an interesting correction.
that he, you know, so I think for those kinds of people, there are gonna be
Some,
there's still gonna be things that need to be explained away. They still wouldn't support some of the things, and this is why we see people shifting, right? As some of this stuff happens.
yeah, that's,
You know, some of it is because they're realizing that it's far more racist, but some of it is, it's just so much more chaotic.
right.
And it's.
Oh, that's another.
Yeah, yeah.
So I forgot.
Francis.
So, friends, yeah.
Thank you so much, Heather. That was really interesting. I was really fascinated by your idea of this like wishful thinking, people inserting their own fig leaves, and like the suggestion that could be some sort of like working of implicature and inserting implicature. But I wonder, like, because you know, a feature of implicatures is that they're very easily cancelable, and like the sort of implied content goes away. Like if I'm like, Jason's class is good, then you know there's some sort of quantity implicature, and then I go, actually, like it's great. Like that good sort of like it's man meaning is just like kind of gone, poof. And I guess like I was wondering what you think about like fig leaves working like this, because it seems to me that there's like a bit more of a persistence to like this like people seem way more like persistent to like insert this fig leaf that like Trump's joking, and it seems to be like less cancelable in that way. Where like even once you insert that implicature, the sort of like if you were to cancel it, that like at issue content, would it really just like be gone?
Yeah. So great point. I think implicatures aren't always easy to cancel. So, for example, relevance implicatures are really hard to cancel because if you said it and then you say, but that's not really relevant. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So trying to, you know, you'd have the I think it was the New York Times that used to always say things like, Mr. Smith, who happens to be Black. Not that I'm saying that's relevant. It's like, I'm sorry, you have not succeeded in canceling the implicature that you think that's relevant, right? Because why did you say it, right? So I think people sometimes overestimate how easy it is to cancel all implicatures. I think sometimes it can be hard to cancel an implicature. But you're right that if I want to tell a story about that, then I need to think about how analogous it is. And it might also be, you know, this is, like I said, it's a story I haven't started trying to tell yet. But if it's an implicature I need in order to understand the speaker as acceptable, it might work differently. It might be harder to cancel those. I'm not sure. I haven't thought that through yet.
Gavin.
Yeah, and it follows on from that because it looks like motivated reasoning to me, trying to invent
Absolutely
some
is.
rationalization.
Yes.
And then the question is, what's motivating that? And
Yeah.
it seems, I mean, you mentioned it could be sympathy, underlying sympathy for the racism. It could be wishful thinking that it's not really as bad as all that. It strikes me that there's a whole range of things that could be going on, all of which could be politically very important. So it's just an invitation to say.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think all those things are possible. I think also the thought that it would reflect badly on you. You know, so suppose you had voted for him or supported him, and then if you don't find a way of explaining this away, then you're going to have to face up to something bad about yourself.
Yep.
It can be that you would be frightened if this was true. You know, so in the case of those undocumented immigrants who said that they supported Trump because they thought he was only after the bad ones, it would be terrifying to believe it was true. So you don't believe it's true, you find ways of explaining it away. Yeah, and I think you're right, the motivated reasoning literature is going to have a lot to say about that stuff.
Sorry,
Sophie.
Sophie, yeah, I knew it.
Yes,
Sophie. Yeah.
I thought the talk was great. I guess I have two related questions and then maybe a reading suggestion if you haven't. Just because I'm curious what you think. So I'm thinking of like fig leaves in the era of dog whistles. So the first kind of thought I had was the relationship between online politics and like electoral politics. So, because you start with the fig leaves in 2016 or 2015 with the first Trump presidency, but in 2008, I'm sure you're familiar with, like, it's about ethics in video game journalism, right? The Gamergate stuff. So, and then there's the 4chan. It
didn't occur to me to think of that as a fig leaf. But
Yeah,
that's
it's a fig
nice.
leaf, right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah,
it's not. It's actually about ethics in video game journalism. And then it's just a joke kind of 4chan stuff. So the recommendation, just give you my, is Andrew Lopez, a paper called "It's Just a Joke."
Oh, right. Okay, great.
Thinking online politics with Jorge Portilla.
Okay, great.
So easy. So you just find that interesting.
Yeah.
So thinking about that relationship, but also about fig leaves used prior to the Trump administration with respect to justifying racist violence, like he feared for his life,
of course,
in the case of police killings. So like, I guess maybe first question is just like, what relationship, if any, do you see between sort of pre-Trump online politics and IRL politics? And then just like, I'm just pessimistic about like, are things worse? Are they worse for different populations? Like if we go back to these sort of norms of racial equality, like there's still police killings and there's still like just the the necropolitics of it all. So I'm just
so the things have never been good.
Yeah,
but I do think things are worse right now. But so I am looking at fig leaves particularly. I was prompted to look at fig leaves by Trump, but I don't mean that he invented them or that they only became relevant in the Trump era. I think fig leaves go way back. I think that's a way of explaining away stuff that you need to explain away because it's violating norms. And I think humans have needed to do that for a very long time, possibly forever, right? I think the reason Trump is especially interesting is just because he managed to get away with stuff that people thought you couldn't get away with by using these fig leaves, but also by a lot of other stuff that was going on. So there was also, a lot of online activity in particular building up to support this kind of thing. So I don't mean to be suggesting that it was just a Trump era thing.
Kristen?
I think my question is basically the same as your question about motivated reasoning. I'm not as familiar with that literature, but I really liked that. You're bringing the focus to racial fig leaves as this sort of automatic inference, and I like that it has that in common with implicature, and it was also reminding me of like Stockholm syndrome sort of phenomenon. I think. I don't have as much to say now that I know about the motivated reasoning literature. That sounds like really interesting. I need to look at it. But anyway, thanks for making those connections. And I guess I'd be curious to hear if you think those things are related, like maybe Stockholm syndrome and racial fig leaves.
I'm sorry, I hadn't thought to connect those. It makes me wish that I had listened to the "You're Wrong About" episode that was about "You're Wrong About Stockholm Syndrome." Which
I listened to it.
Oh, okay. I don't know. I might be wrong about it. I mean, certainly it is a kind of wishful thinking. Like I need to, at least as it's popularly understood, it's a kind of, I want to understand my characters as good because then I won't feel so bad about my situation. And so that does seem like an instance of motivated reasoning. But I think it's right that bring the motivated reasoning literature in to understand that kind of bring that into conversation with the literature on interpretation of utterances. It's the kind of thing I think I need to do.
And if I may just interject, the wish to identify with those with power from a position of powerlessness.
Yeah.
One of the
Yeah, that's probably right. Yeah.
What?
So beginning of the talk of the motivated project, you reminded us that some parts of the world haven't yet fully moved to the far right, but are in that process. So paying a lot of attention to language, special attention to language would be helpful. And I think you're absolutely right. So
My two countries are pretty far gone.
So I'm Brazilian, but I'm in Australia and thinking about the Australian context. And so that was made me think about the ethics of fighting racist, sexist speech. In particular, when it comes to this supply of fake news by third parties, because I think sometimes it's generally very hard to tell whether people are supplying the fake news or they're just complying to a norm of charity, right? And so it's very hard to know how to react. So I'll give you an example. I want to hear more about, at what point do we just find the fig leaves and abandon the norm of charity, and try and say, look, there's no more time to stand up for charity. Basically, that's my question, because there was a very good example from Australia this week, where the Prime Minister called an outspoken young feminist difficult. He was playing this game where people were giving him names, and then he had to kind of give his first response, and he called it difficult. Now, as it happens, she also had a very difficult childhood because she was sexually abused. And that's how a lot of people came to the Prime Minister's response, defense, by saying, look, he was referring to her upbringing, right? And the feminists were, no, he's talking about outspoken, when, feminists were critical of the government, et cetera, And I mean, maybe he generally was thinking about her upbringing, right?
Yeah.
This is a center-left politician, intention, cares about the right things, or calling him a libertarian. Many good reasons to defend him. But at the same time, I mean, Australia is a country now with very high levels of sexual violence, language around women being difficult. It's not, at some point, how much domestic violence are we going to tolerate before we're very strict when it comes to that kind of language, right? So anyway, is there a kind of tipping point where we kind of abound charity and just go for?
So it's great to raise the issue of charity, because one of the reasons why these fig leaves can be so tempting and people can use them so effectively is that there's something to this head-heart dichotomy. People do say things they don't mean sometimes. It does happen, and you don't want to be completely unforgiving of people, and it is a good thing to do. On the other hand, it can be used in this kind of way that is a real problem. I mean, I guess I wouldn't ever want to say that you reach a point where you should never be charitable to anyone again, because for one thing, if you ever want to fight this stuff, you need to build coalitions, right? And they need to be big, right? And if you build a coalition of only the people who have only ever been perfect in what they said, it's not going to be a big enough coalition, right? But I think you need to do more than just look at what was said and whether there was a fig leaf. I think you need to look at total patterns of behavior over long periods of time, and you need to look at lots and lots of different evidence. To take a U.S. example that is very salient for many people right now, there's a Democratic candidate for Senate in Maine who the progressive left fell madly in love with quite quickly, named Graham Plattner, a fisherman with lots of lovely left-wing policies, and who made a very appealing video about his support for these left-wing policies and his life as a fisherman, and all these posts of "I love woke Thor," and then his Nazi tattoo came out. It's a skull that is a particular skull that represents a particular Nazi group. And his explanation has been that he was young and stupid and drunk in the military and didn't know what it was, and didn't realize what it was until people told him during the campaign, and now he's had it changed into something else. And I don't know what to make of it. I think a lot's going to depend on how I think probably you need to observe him over a long period of time and see what he's actually like. Right? He is doing genuine, fulsome apologies of what an idiot he was and why he did the stupid things that he did and why he said those homophobic things and why he was discriminating. A lot has come out. But it's not been the usual, I'm sorry that my words have been misinterpreted. It's been, I was an idiot. I was young and stupid, and here's why I did. And I think there's still a place. I think you wouldn't want to throw somebody like that out. I think it's a hard question in that case. I think there's a lot of evidence on both sides of that one. I think it's hard to decide. In other cases, it's not so hard to decide. Sometimes, I actually had a Spanish student visiting in Sheffield whose nickname in Spain was actually a terrible racial slur in the UK. And she did not know that. And so when she said, I'm sorry, I didn't mean that, it was manifestly true, right? That was just her name in Spain and it had a different meaning in the UK. So I think there's still a place for charity. I think it's not going to be a matter of every time someone says I'm not a racist, we accept that they're not a racist, right? It's going to be a lot. It requires a much closer examination. I know that's a long-winded, not very satisfying answer, but it's a hard question.
Monty?
Fascinating conversation. I thank you for that. My comment concern is the very thin, fragile veneer of civility, utter civility, which can be shattered at any point. And the inflection point is raw and words. I mean, when you talk about dog whistles, on one side, positive, at least they're being used. Because when they stop being used and people become blunt and direct, you are this. Mm-hmm. Bang, 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 bang. That's when the system crashes. Trump may be many things. He is amoral, but he is cunning and he's supremely intelligent in a very narrow sense. When he gauges the populace, the people that he wishes to use, he has absolutely no casual regard for anyone except himself and perhaps the family, and then if you extend it to the Trump crime family. And so my query is, where do we go from here? How do we elucidate? Because I'm thinking of Frantz Fanon, when he shattered, when he was actually, he was blunt, but he picked the truth. And right now, in the States, and to a lesser degree in Canada, we are all in a form of what I call trembling. Not necessarily fear, but in the sense of trembling. We just don't know what's happening. And where is the courage, moral courage? And Michael Sandel, when he parses courage, where do we go from here? And what is the offing? Words can be used positively, restrictively, and words can be very harsh and negatively. And it's the individual. We need to take account, and people need to be held to account. I absolutely despise and loathe the enablers, because I gave this man power and privilege, because little people want to keep their little jobs in the Senate and in the House to receive their emoluments. They lack the courage. To them, I hold the harshest rebellion, and time is going to tell. And so where do you go from here, and how do you feel? Well, what you just said earlier on, and I enjoyed your lecture.
There's a lot. Yeah, I think it is a really weird fact that I didn't appreciate when I first started thinking about dog whistles, that dog whistles are actually a sign that there are still some norms in place to restrain this that you can then appeal to, right? And I think the norms, they're not in place for everyone. I think they are still there to be appealed to for quite a few people. I think there's indications of that. But I actually think the hope is to be found in like the people on the streets in Minnesota actually getting out there and protecting immigrants from ICE. I think there are actions taking place that show enormous bravery. I think the politicians are not, for the most part, showing any bravery at all. But I think the ordinary people who are getting out there in the streets and doing things are incredibly brave, and they're the ones showing the way.
Noah?
Yeah, I'm thinking about differences in the purposes of dog whistles on each side of the political spectrum, because it seems to me like an important asymmetry in how dog whistles are used on the right and on the left is on the right, it seems to primarily be about kind of social acceptability. It's about not violating this norm of not being racist. Whereas on the left, it seems like a primarily kind of pragmatic, it's much more pragmatic considerations. It's like avoiding censorship, it's avoiding repression. So I was thinking like about the cute winter boots case, but also cases like, I don't know if anyone's seen, but like sometimes I'll get like an Instagram reel and it's someone who's just like sat there and is like, someone's got to do it. I'm not saying who, but someone's got to do it. And like, it seems to me that like those kinds of cases, they seem like dog whistles, but they don't obviously fall into either of the established categories, like the overt or the covert, because it seems like there's not a group, like, it seems like both sides of the political spectrum are going to consciously understand what's meant in the cute winter boots case, where they like, you know, they see what's being communicated, they see like the dates of different ice raids or whatever. And then in the like someone's got to do it case, like everyone understands what that means. So I'm thinking about like what unifies cases of dog whistles. Like, is there something beyond them merely being used to communicate some political content that unifies them? Because it seems like this kind of social acceptability concern that motivates it on one side, and the like pure concern with avoiding censorship, with avoiding like repression by the algorithm. It seems like these are two very like disparate use cases.
Okay, so the way that I'm understanding them is that they're unified in part by the way they function, but you're talking about the relationship to norms. I see them both as motivated, in both kinds of cases, as motivated by the need to get around a norm. In one case, it's a norm that perhaps you accept. In another case, it's a norm that's being imposed on you, right, by oppressive forces. But in both cases, there's a norm there, and those are going to be different kinds of norms. But you can also get dog whistles on the left that are motivated by like widely accepted norms, not just imposed by governments. So, for example, you get the language polari that gay men in the UK used to communicate with each other, because it would have been socially unacceptable to do so, right? I love the example. Someone's got to do it. I actually went to Nebraska last month and bought a T-shirt that said, "Is he dead yet?" And talking to the people at the shop where it was sold, they were accused of threatening the life of the president. And they successfully defended themselves by saying, "That just says he." And why are you assuming anything? And it's a question. And he goes, "Yes." I don't think those are dog whistles. I think they are implicatures taking advantage of what's obviously salient. My partner is actually writing a paper about the social media posts that happened right after the Trump assassination attempt. And it's called "You Miss 100% of the Shots You Don't Take," because that was a very popular post at that time. And the way that that seems to work, in the immediate aftermath of the assassination, is that the sort of event of the day fills in, for what the background must be, right? This makes no sense unless you know when it was posted and what else happened that day, right? You can't make sense of what's going on. And I think those aren't dog whistles. I think dog whistles require more of an element of conventionalization, and these aren't conventionalized. They're taking advantage of the fact that we'll, make some inferences about who this must refer to. But it's not like 88, 8 stands for H, and that stands for Heil Hitler, and now we know how we're, it's not like that. So I think it's a little bit different, but I think you're right that the norms are function kind of differently in the left and right cases.
William?
Yes, thank you. So my question is more around what is your theory of how language or linguistic acts relate to either belief formation or social action? I think those are two distinct, because I can engage in actions but not actually have the beliefs that are entailed by those actions, or I can have a set of beliefs but not follow through in those actions. So with the example of fig leaf, is it that these language acts actually do shape the belief structures of those who either are taken in by it or act as if they're taken in by it? Or does it enable a type of, acting as if you're being charitable, even if you might believe, I know it's racist, but this actually allows me to act if it's not? Or is it just, the idea that my beliefs might not even be fully formed, and the big leaf just allows me to not have to make a decision? So I'm wondering what the relationship
It's a great question.
between belief formation and social action is.
Yeah, so I think all of the above and more to some extent. So I think it's not that people hear the fig leaf and a very specific thing happens, right? So I think for some people it's, I can't really tell what's going on, so maybe I don't have to worry about whether that's racist or not. I like his economic policies, right? And then you can just not think about it. I think other people, they may think, okay, good, he's not racist, and then form that belief he's not racist. How deeply they believe it, who knows?
Yeah.
But I think another thing that happens is that through the presence of fig leaves, people are able to get away with saying those things more often in public. And they'll spread farther on social media because people will be more likely to share them. And there's just a kind of habituation effect of being exposed to these kinds of utterances that makes it more acceptable to say those things. And so that means that there's much more of the extremely explicit stuff out there. And that habituation makes it less shocking, makes it feel more okay, more normal. And I think that it's not going to be an immediate, oh,
My beliefs are now this.
he said it, so I've changed my mind. But I think there's a subtler kind of habituation effect. Now, this is very much speculative because I haven't yet found psychologists who want to do research on this with me, but I would like to.
Let's hear it. Yeah. Right.
Okay, so thank you for the talk. It was very great. And I wanted to ask if do you think that the conservative narrative that social rights movements undermine free speech has played any role in the progression towards explicit language? Because in Spain, for instance, defending free speech has shifted from a left-wing thing to a right-wing thing. And the narrative is basically that politicians who make increasingly racist messages are finally saying what many people think but can no longer express. And this causes conservative people to believe that they are the rebels somehow, that they are like racing against oppressive norms. So do you think that this identifying as the rebels has played any role in the progression towards explicit racist speech?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think it's been really fascinating to watch how quickly this stuff has shifted. So the free speech warriors were on the right over the last 10 years. And now those exact same people are putting out literal lists of banned words, right? So I think that's right. And I think also that it's being able to respond to, any criticism of the obviously racist speech could be responded to with, this is political correctness gone mad. This is wokeism. You snowflakes, you're trying to police what I'm saying. And one of the things that does is it means that you're shifting the topic away from what was said and the effects of what was said and onto the question of whether our norms are too censorious. And I think that did a lot of work to keep people from examining this properly. Yeah.
Hira?
Yeah, my question is pretty much the same as Noah's. I just wanted to press on a bit on the idea that, okay, the norms of the dog whistles that are used by the right might be different from the norms that are used by the dog whistles that are used by the left. Both are reactions to norm, but I thought that the idea of dog whistle had to do not only with it being a reaction to a norm, but also the kind of norm it is. So I thought it had to do with some ideology that one either doesn't accept and like, for instance, called ideology of racial equality in the way you were saying, like folk white psychology. And it seemed that was intrinsically, the idea of a dog whistle was intrinsically related to reacting to that ideology, playing with it, shifting the norms of acceptability. But I don't know, how can you kind of like flesh out the norm that the Trumpists are imposing when it just seems to be an act of bare force? Of course, they have an ideology of their own, you know what I mean? Of course, a racist ideology, but the norm that they're imposing is not something like do not be racist in the way that the folk psychology seem to articulate it. It just seems more like these words cannot be used, that speech act is prohibited, things like that. So basically the question was still, again, like how constitutive to a dog whistle is this relation to ideology part? Or
not at all for me.
Okay.
For other people, yes. So for me, dog whistles are ways of getting around norms and saying things and communicating what you want to communicate in a way that gets around norms that would otherwise restrain you. Other people build a bunch of other stuff in. I don't.
So it's me, the people. So I think this connects to Jason's first question. That sort of like, I still think that, there's a group, there might be less interesting, the group that they might be missing here. And then going through sort of what is sort of the academic right who voted for Trump. And the idea is like, sort of like, one way to put it very charitably is like, voting there's never that sort of anything that's disqualifying vote, because voting is comparative. If you have Mussolini versus Hitler, you're gonna have to vote for Mussolini. So that's sort of like, we knew he was racist, and those things were racist. We're not trying to cover this up, but the other people, they are kind of trying they're kind of running on lies, on a senile person who's kind of destroying society. So and it's just kind of I have sort of bizarrely got to have all the
free speech stuff.
The free speech, so are they going to restore free speech?
Right,
Yeah, they're going to be
of course he's a racist, but he'll restore free speech.
And the racist thing is going to be the courts will take care of it, and so on. So that sort of you're going to be overall. Yeah. And actually, it's interesting because there's a sense which I'm sympathetic to the total. Like I have friends in the Catholic left. They're also kind of communists. They're kind of very radical, whatever the consequences, people. So in the 2016 elections, I don't know what they did in the 2004. They didn't vote for anyone because Trump was a racist, so they're not vote for him. But Hillary was pro-choice, so they're not going to vote for her either. But that seems like like you can't do that in an election. That's like So I don't know, but
the pro-life, pro-choice thing is just.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I mean, I guess. So I think my answer to this is that I still consider those to be in group 3. They're people who didn't like his words and actions, but found ways to explain them away. Actually, I shouldn't say just explain away. It's not explain away, but it's also found ways to, I guess, we're counterbalanced by other things.
Exactly.
Is that what you're saying? But I also think they are explaining it away to some extent. So they are not, when he said, I'm going to have one day of extreme violence, they probably told him, so no, he doesn't mean that.
What do you think? But he's not going to succeed.
You make a move in response to this, to me, which is the same point, which is there's going to be some other one.
Yeah.
So they might be like, okay, he's racist. But you're saying, I mean, it's an empirical claim to make.
Because they're also having to deal with the fact that January 6th happened. I mean, yes, I mean.
I mean, one of them.
Oh, good point.
Yeah.
Because many of them, the people we're talking about were like we're like, okay, January 6th was bad. Is that
Well, but it was bad, but he didn't really mean it. Or that was just his supporters, or they're finding ways to explain these things away still. I mean, I'm fine with the thought that there's another group of people who just who balance things off against each other. But I think for them to balance against each other, they have to find a way of saying he's not as extreme as he seems. Right. And that's the point where this is the point where I'm disagreeing with you two. I mean, then there are the academic, right? And I know some of them personally who are just enthusiastic racists and misogynists.
There's those two. Yeah.
I know one of them. I used to know one of them rather well.
Actually, it's interesting they mentioned the January 6th thing, because there's a post from one of those people saying that he was going to vote for Harris because this is going to undermine democracy, and then those people say no, but both parties are trying to undermine democracy.
But you have to not take seriously the extremist things. You have to find ways of explaining away the stuff that seems really extremist and really destructive of institutions, because those people are usually institutionalists, right? But I'm fine with adding a fourth group. That's okay. I can do that. I just think that most of them are still going to be explaining some stuff away. Yeah.
So we have a couple minutes.
But the people I know on the academic right are really up there in category.
There are those too. Yeah. But to be fair, some of them have been denouncing the racists. So,
not the one I'm thinking of.
No, I'm sure. I think I know exactly where you're going. Sorry.
Something I'm becoming more concerned about here in Canada is closed communications. Like there's privacy stuff going on with the political parties putting through a bill that will exempt them from, I mean, they're already exempt, but that issue. And so with micro-targeting, it would seem that dog whistles and fig leaves wouldn't be necessary.
That's
because
right.
You're just talking
Yeah.
one. I mean, it doesn't sound like you looked at that, but just curious.
Oh, no, that's one of the things that's really interesting. I think that's right. I haven't focused on that because in those contexts, you don't have to do this stuff. You might do it for fun because the dog whistles are fun. So, but that's why you get the really extreme stuff on Telegram or something like that. One of the things that's actually been interesting coming out in the Epstein files, along with all the stuff that you'd expect, is like very open racism and sexism without any fig leaves or dog whistles. Because this is private email correspondence that I thought would never be made public.
I noticed a lot of those guys were like, at the time, the scientific racist guys.
Yeah.
Scientific.
And scientific
Summers,
sexist
too,
as well.
Yeah, all the economists, I saw it at the time.
Yeah, and they're just extremely open about it because they thought these were private communications. So, yeah.
Yes, William, yeah.
Basically, I find this fascinating, so I guess I just have a couple of maybe small questions. One, what is your positive proposal for how to respond to this? So I know one proposal is, from a certain segment of the left is, you just have to double down on free speech. In other words, you can only address this by actually having clear, transparent communication. In fact, the attempt to circumvent that probably gives rise to more of this. And the second question, I kind of have the whole explaining away. I mean, when we're focusing on Trump voters, we can see that, but someone could also say that those who are anti-Trump voters are also explaining things away, say on the Democratic side. And so is this just a more general feature of, we tend to explain things away in order to justify our actions? And if that's the case, it's a symptom of a more broader problem, I think.
Yeah, that's a depressingly plausible idea. I don't have an answer to what we need to do, except that actually what we need to do right now is, I shouldn't be saying this, not sit around talking about language.
I think you still have some optimism that I find objectionable. So there's still like, if you can actually supply people.
I think there are reachable people, and I don't know.
Right. There must be.
I'm watching people change their minds over time.
Right. But here's a depressing feature about now that we've learned, and I think Gaza is the best example, but now we can see ICE is another example, or lots of cases, there's an enabling structure. In the Holocaust, it took, people risked their lives, like Jan, I forget his name, a Polish resistance guy in the Polish Home Army, snuck into Auschwitz to figure out what was going on, and then snuck out. Then he got an audience with Churchill and Roosevelt, and they didn't believe him. So the idea then was if you just revealed the information, it was heroic, right? But now we're just looking at journalists getting killed in Gaza, and children, and people are especially if you talk to Israelis, they're very, it's brutal and bloody. I was talking to an Israeli, and I was like, I got in trouble in Frankfurt I was talking about, it's like a Nazi ghetto in Nazi occupied Poland. And he's like, those Germans need to, they really need to learn something. They're just, naive or whatever. I'm like, it's awful what's happening, isn't it? And he's like, no, it's gotta be like that. It's good. I think Stalingrad's a better analogy, but you gotta do that too. So that's
not everybody's reachable.
Yeah, but I think I think we're all being made unreachable by the constant images in some way. I don't know why, but given how attention to something seemed so crucial to reachability. Like, that's the civil rights movement, right? White Americans like, oh my God, they're beating people up on the Selma Bridge. And that's what they intended to do. But now it doesn't seem to be working.
I think people are clearly being reached. There's a reason that Minnesotans behaved the way they did. And a lot of them, I mean, it was huge numbers of ordinary people who had never done anything like that before, whose lives became completely taken over by helping their neighbors who are being targeted by ICE. Those are people getting out there and doing something.
Yeah.
Now, the people in power are not reachable. We're not going to change Stephen Miller, right? We're not going to change Trump. But
I don't think everyone upset,
but there are
not upset by pictures of Gaza is like Stephen Miller.
I didn't say that. I'm saying that people are reachable, and you're telling me about people who aren't. And I'm saying there are actually quite large numbers of people who have clearly been reached and changed their minds, and are getting out there and actually doing something about it. And even after they've seen people murdered in the street for doing that, they're turning out in greater numbers, which shows real commitment to it.
It depends on the issue, how reachable.
Sure, absolutely.
Because in the Gaza case, far fewer people are reachable.
Absolutely. But it depends on what you mean by reaching them and who you're trying to reach. I mean, it may be that enough got reached that Kamala Harris lost the presidency, according to what's come out recently.
Yeah, right. Oh, you're totally right. Yeah.
So it may be not
right.
the effect that you want,
right.
but they were reached.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, these are just two data points, so it's not yet a pattern. But one might look at these things, say like Minnesota and Gaza, and think that, well, actually, what we're learning about reachability and persuasion is that it seems like it doesn't happen through just the exchange of ideas. That it happens in very extreme limit cases. So Minnesota, I think Minnesota's an interesting case because Minnesota has a kind of deep culture of understanding themselves as independent in that way.
But also caring about the community. Right.
Care about the community. He also wears the badge of honor, the only state to have never voted for Reagan. So there's like generations of that. But and the question I want to ask is, when people are persuaded, are they persuaded by ideas, or are they persuaded by the exigency in action? And I think it makes a difference which path you choose, because I know most would prefer the first path. That's a very nice story we tell about democracy and all that. Yeah. If we can just all get around the table.
And of course, academics love that.
Oh yeah, academics love this. I think most people are talking. So I'm just wondering if you.
No, I think
built in.
It's hard and depressing question. I don't think people. I mean, I'm persuaded by ideas, but I'm not persuaded. But I think really what is persuading people and the people who are changing their minds, they're changing their minds because the person they like who runs that restaurant was picked up by ICE, or their neighbors are afraid to take their kids to school. Or I think they're persuaded by seeing what happens to people they love.
Whatever process that is.
Yeah. Although the people who are persuaded in the U.S. to vote for Trump or stay home because of Gaza probably didn't actually know people were Gaza. That might have been ideas.
Right. That's ideas. But the pictures or the art.
Yeah, that's true. The emotional reaction to those things. Yeah.
Okay, so
thanks so much for the great discussion.
I found that the friendliest conferences I've ever gone to are like the genocide conferences, genocide studies.
They go, their ways be nice.
Everyone's like super interested.
I love it.
Should we turn off the?
Oh yeah. Once I was working on
One thing that's so great about these topics is they're not like these narrow areas where there's 3 ways to go.